This is episode 510 on the 20th of April 2022. The Indian national T20 domestic competition isn't the only one of its kind, and it is nothing special. It's been going on for the past 14 to 15 years, and yet every time it happens in the month of April to June, in that period between April to June, or sometimes due to external and facetious reasons like the cases rising, which is absolutely nonsense, but we'll discuss that later. Due to those reasons, which don't really make sense, it can happen sometimes in October, November, but either way, it happens once every year. It's not the only tournament which takes place every year. There are other tournaments. There is the Badminton World Federation tournament, the overhyped Grand Slams, the Australian Open, the Wimbledon Open, the US Open, the French Open, where the overhyped individuals like Nadal and Federer and Djokovic and Tsitsipas and others also participate. So this tournament is nothing special. And every time we discuss it, we look at it with we scoff at it. It's been going on for 15 years. The same template has been followed. Every year the commentators repeat like a broken record. Wow, look at this tournament. Talent coming in, talent coming out. Well, they have to say it. They have been employed by the organizers. They have to say it's a great tournament. If they don't, they will be fired. So you cannot take them at the face value because it's a superficial comment that it brings out talent every year. But more on that later. Human beings are a confused lot. They are confused between hobbies and professions. Well, the minor difference between hobbies and profession is that hobbies are activities which are done without paycheck, but if that same activity generates a paycheck, generates a living, it turns into a profession. When it turns into a profession, hobbies are for fun without any pressure. And when that same thing turns into a profession, which is, well, one can say that everyone has to earn a paycheck. Everyone wants to earn a paycheck, whether they do it from the discomfort of their home or they have to travel to the respective workplace. But this definition might just open a Pandora's box. Hobbies are great distraction from the worries and troubles that plague daily living. But what are the worries and troubles that plague daily living? Because once hobbies turn into professions, then those are the worries and troubles that plague daily living. You have to earn for your family. You have to go through the mundane task of paying taxes and all the troubles that come along with it. Are they great distractions? Well, they are great distractions, but sometimes hobbies turn into an actual profession, that is an actual paycheck kind of situation. Then what happens? The same hobbies which were great distractions become part of the worries and troubles that plague daily living. Of course, I disagree with this definition that there are worries and troubles that plague daily living, because we have this thing in our mind that once upon a time the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s were great eras. There were no troubles, and thanks to pseudo media and Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, things have become more complicated. But what are some of the mundane hobbies that individuals engage in? Remember, some of these hobbies are ridiculous. Let's look at them one by one. The most ridiculous hobby is scrolling pseudo media. We all know what is part of pseudo media: the Twitter, the fake book, or the Insta gratification, or the Insta headache, or Instagram, or any other such pseudo media. Actually scrolling pseudo media and trying to say that I will get knowledge from it, I will become a polymath by scrolling pseudo media is the most ridiculous and dumbest thing I've ever heard. But that's human nature. We are happy scrolling pseudo media because we presume that it's a great distraction. I think pseudo media is the worry and trouble that plague daily living, not a distraction. Pseudo media is the plague, not the distraction. And reading books, I don't need to tell the whole world that I read a book. I don't need to plan reading a book in that manner. When I read a book, I just read a book. I don't have to say that it's a hobby. Reading a book cannot be a hobby because it's just an activity we do. Sometimes reading books or creating our own content, sometimes it's done for fun. But when this fun turns into a paycheck, then the same thing tends to put pressure on us. We have to be professional, we have to be perfect. When we do an activity in terms of it being a hobby, we can afford to make mistakes. But when that same hobby turns into a profession, then we cannot afford to make a mistake. Human beings are judged at the most mundane levels. And sports athletes, the way we look at sports athletes, the way pseudo media, print media, electronic media, digital media, and all other forms look at sports athletes, they cannot make a mistake. We put them on a pedestal when they are doing well, and when the phase comes, which is fine, it happens. It happens with everyone. It's happening with a certain individual in every sport. When that happens, then we say, after all, he is human. After all, why he is not able to do the job he was doing 5-6 years ago. We put him on the pedestal, then there's a slump in form, just as the economy goes up and goes down, or something else goes up and goes down, graph will go down. And of course, we judge an individual by the number of runs he scores in cricket, by the number of goals he scores in football, by the number of medals they win in various other athletics competition. But we'll talk more on that later. Let's get back to this. Scrolling pseudo media as a hobby, ridiculous. Reading books, it's not a hobby, it's not a profession, it's done. Maybe after completing this episode, I will read a book, but I don't have to read the whole book. I don't have to tell the world which book I'm reading. Sometimes these things can be done without putting everything out there. And sometimes doing nothing, I don't know what is exactly doing nothing, is an activity. And dancing, well, it depends. You start dancing as a hobby, you just do it for fun. But if you become a professional dancer where you are a choreographer or you're a part of a troupe which dances, then the pressure is different because you have to be perfect. You cannot afford to make mistakes. So the thin line between hobby and profession will always remain thin. Maybe it is diminishing. We will never know. So why hobbies? As I said, hobbies are for fun and it's part-time. So if I write an article but I do not earn a paycheck from it, it's a hobby. But if I write an article on whatever subject, on whatever expertise I have, and it gets published in a major newspaper or a electronic media or wherever, and I get a paycheck from it, then that turns into a full-time job. When it's a hobby, the article doesn't have to be perfect. article may not be scrutinized by 10, 12 individuals who think they have knowledge about the subject and they have the right to reject. When it becomes a full-time job, then you're under pressure to write one every day. When it's a hobby, I can write 2 articles in a month. But when it's a full-time job, I have to write 365 in 365 days, or I will lose the contract from that particular establishment. And of course, it's all about having the right skill sets. So at this point, I don't even know what is the definition of the term skill, because for us, skill has a very myopic, limited definition. As I've said a million times before, communication is the only skill that is required. Communication, that is spoken communication, non-verbal communication, and written communication. If you can become a polymath and you can have good communication skills, if you can communicate with others in whatever language, it doesn't matter which language, then you are skilled. Creating an application or doing all the technical stuff or being a hacker or preventing your organization from being hacked, being an ethical hacker is not a skill set. Being on the computer is not a skill set. Creating a software is not skill. It is just something you know, but that's not skill. So our definition of skill is limited, but the only skill that is required in this world is communication. Everybody wants to communicate with the other person, send the right message, whether it's through your spoken language, whether you're speaking Spanish, Greek, or Bengali, Malayalam, whatever be your language, that's irrelevant. If you can speak, if you can communicate in a proper manner, if the other individual can understand up to some extent what your message is, that's the skill. And audience, everybody wants an audience. If my article which I write, it generates millions of viewers, then I have an audience. And then this mundane work-life balance. When it's a hobby, there is no work-life balance because you're enjoying yourself. But when it turns into a full-time job, when you have to write 365 articles in 365 days, or when you're an author with the viewpoint to sell your books and earn a paycheck from it, then it becomes a question of work-life balance. That can you take a break from your work and give time to other activities, to your other individuals? So hobbies can work at most point in time, and hobbies turning into profession is nothing new. That will always happen. But let's look at from the point of view of this talk show. Like I said in the last episode about goal setting, that I did not have specific goals when this talk show was concerned. It just started happening. So this talk show started as a hobby and a part-time, which when I realized that I had the skill set to be one of the best talk show hosts in the world, on the planet, in the universe, in the galaxy, when I started to develop the right tools needed, the right communication, the right subject I could talk about, it becomes a full-time thing. Will the paycheck come from it? Yes, paycheck is always part of the deal. You start as something that is fun, it's still fun. It's still somewhere between part-time and full-time, but it's something which I do with due diligence. It's the same thing when a young person wants to be a sports athlete. They have to balance between education, academics, and sports. So after completing the school, they go to the sports academy and they engage in sports. So once they realize that their skill in the sport is at a higher level, then they start taking it seriously. They participate in tournaments. They hope that they will be inducted into the national team and they will become legends. So every hobby turning into a part-time thing, into a full-time thing is not new. When you look at young kids, they have these kids of doctors, they pretend to be doctors, but soon it may turn out to be a serious profession, that okay, I will take this profession seriously. When young children engage in summer activities where they sell lemonade or any such condiments. They do it because it's one way to earn your own pocket money and be involved. And later they realize everyone loves my lemonade or my coffee. I can turn this into a full-time business, and why not? And that's how Starbucks is born, or any other such entity is born. It all starts as something fun, but when you realize that it can become an activity which can generate a paycheck because you are skilled in it, and then you go for it. We all start everything as a hobby, as a part-time thing, as something fun. But turning a hobby into a profession, it's a state of mind, but it doesn't take long. People may not take you seriously when you are young, but 20 years down the line, they will say, yes, he was training himself for this particular profession. He spent over 20 years, and do those years count? But that depends on how we look at what training means. Is it training from a proper institute, or it is just an unofficial training method? But that's all a state of mind. Talking about the state of mind of the Indian national T20 domestic competition for the teams is to win the toss and bowl first. It has been happening for the past 1 month. Each team has played 7 matches now at least, and teams like Gujarat, Bangalore, Hyderabad are now being built as the teams to beat, as the teams who have come over a corner. Teams like Bangalore, who had, let's presume, a terrible tournament last year where they reached the semi-finals but couldn't go further, and they've had ups and downs. So will Bangalore enter its 4th final and then finally win its first ever national T20 domestic competition? They have been waiting for this for the past 14 years. They had 3 chances, 2009, 2011 and 2016. So they have made it to the finals. And the common link being one individual who has been there since day one. So he wasn't someone to be taken seriously in 2009, but seriously enough in 2011, and we put him on that legendary status in 2016. Who is this individual? Take a guess. And in 2022, when the captaincy is in charge of a new individual, this person has nothing to lose. So Bangalore as a team, can they do it? Well, at this point, every team except 2 teams can make it to the semi-finals, can have an up so 2 teams, we all know who the 2 teams are who may not make it to the semi-finals and the knockout stage this year, because they are at a disadvantage in terms of losing the matches. They have been heavily criticized for their selection policies, and the players they let go, the players they selected, they don't have pedigreed players, the popular players. And what's the definition of a popular player? It's subjective. So far, only Hyderabad is the only team which has managed to chase down the target, whereas other teams have failed to defend. Of course, Hyderabad won, Gujarat also went chasing score, but winning the toss and bowling first 9 out of 10 times may not work for the teams. If the teams are able to get somewhere between 180 and 190, now let's not even talk about the pitch, because that's the last thing anyone is concerned about. But if you look at how the matches have been, when teams know that if we don't restrict the team between 150 and 160, and if they're able to cross 180 by whatever means, then our chances of winning become 0. And then the excuses are galore. We could have done better, we could have restricted them, we could have chased well. Well, then if you know that, why are you bowling first? The glue and such mundane things don't even come into the picture. So that's the way this tournament is being looked at. Of course, teams like Lucknow, Bangalore, Gujarat, Hyderabad are likely the 4 teams who will make it to the semi-finals, with Bangalore and Lucknow and Gujarat at 10, with Bangalore and Gujarat at 10 points each. What does that mean? They are only 1 or 2 games away from securing their place in the semi-final. It's a long way to go. You need to get at least 9 wins to secure yourself in the semi-final. So still a long way to go for these teams, but 9 wins won't be a problem. And when that happens, then of course the whole eliminator qualifier thing will come into play, which I don't like. But it has worked in this competition, and everyone is appreciating this playoff. So I never call it the playoff. I'll always call it a semi-final and a knockout stages. Even though the team topping gets 2 chances, that's just a matter of luck. Net run rate will come into play. Maybe if teams are tied at same points. That's why teams, if they want to chase, they want to make sure that even if they are losing, they lose by a lesser margin. And the teams which are defending want to make sure that they defeat the team chasing that score by a bigger margin. It hasn't happened so far. The difference on an average has been 15 to 20 runs, which means net run rate will come into the picture very, very soon. But that's the way this tournament is. It's been going on for the past 15 years. There's nothing special about this tournament. This is not the only competition of this nature. There are others, but we have this whole patriotic zeal coming in, and because this tournament pays in buckets that even one suitcase is not enough to fill the paychecks in, literal suitcase or a digital suitcase. So how do I look at this tournament? Of course, speculations are right that this year may be Bangalore's year. Well, too early to say. Gujarat is a decent team, so is Lucknow, and Hyderabad is looking for its second title. So let's presume on a hypothetical note that Rajasthan, Hyderabad, Gujarat, Bangalore, Lucknow are the 5 teams who will qualify for this particular tournament, which leaves 5 teams which will not qualify, but then out of it 2 teams which will definitely not qualify. That will leave the likes of Punjab and Delhi, who would want to win the rest of their matches, but don't be surprised. Tonight's match between Punjab and Delhi, subject to, of course, individuals falling sick in the Delhi team, and they will have to go through a lot of testing before the management says that okay, you are fit enough to play, which I find ridiculous. Just play, even if they are sick, just play. Do not make a big deal out of players falling sick. It's not a big deal. It's not a concern. It's not a breach of all the mundane, insane protocol that have been put in place. So if they fall sick, they fall sick. Everybody gets the flu once in a while. So Rajasthan and Delhi's match, will it happen? Subject to whatever insane policies are there. And then if they don't, each team gets 1 point. That affects the entire tournament. But that's the way things are. So this ends episode number 510 on the 20th of April 2022. Stay tuned for the next episode coming to you live on the 22nd of April 2022.